June 6, 1944. The ground shakes. It's not a rumble you hear so much as you feel it, a constant, low-grade tremor coming up through the solace of my boots, through the packed earth floor of the tent, right into the marrow of my bones. It's the heartbeat of this new, terrible world we've landed in. The air is thick with it, a stew of engine smoke, damp canvas, and something else, something sharp and coppery that I know I'll never get used to. Hope has a smell here too, I think. It smells like antiseptic and fresh bandages, a clean, fighting scent against all the grime. My name is Eleanor Sutton. I'm an Army nurse, and I'm so far from the quiet green fields of Ohio, I can barely remember what silence sounds like. We've been calling this place, this chaotic sprawl of tents and mud just inland from the French coast, Station 76 for weeks now, in sterile planning room terms that mean nothing. No, it has a real name. It's called Omaha. The name tastes like salt and fear. The first one started arriving just after dawn. A trickle at first, then a flood. Not really. They were boys, most of them, but they came to us as collections of mud and blood and tattered uniforms. Their eyes were the worst part, wide, hollow, seeing things that were no longer there. We worked in a kind of frantic, breathless rhythm, a dance we'd practiced but never truly learned the steps to. Cut away the wool, clean the wound, stop the bleeding, a shot of morphine if we had it, a tag, and on to the next. The line never seemed to end. I lost track of time. It could have been midday, could have been evening. The light inside the tent was always the same, a dull yellow glow from the bulbs strung along the canvas ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows that made the whole place feel like a ship tossed on a violent sea. That's when I saw him. They brought him in on a litter, one of dozens that hour. He was set down in my section, near the far wall where the canvas flapped in the wind, letting in occasional gusts of cold, damp air. He was young, so terribly young. Maybe 19, 20 at most. His face was pale under the grime, a smudge of freckles across his nose, standing out like little islands. His hair was a dark, matted mess. But it was the jacket that caught my eye first. A paratrooper. The 101st. He must have come down miles from where he was supposed to be. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, and a dark, ominous stain was spreading slowly across his chest. I moved to him, my hands already reaching for my scissors. "I'm Nurse Sutton," I said, my voice sounding calm and steady, a complete lie. "I'm going to help you. Can you tell me your name, soldier?" His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, fluttered open. They were clouded with pain, but there was a sharpness in them, a flicker of awareness. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He tried again, a dry, rasping whisper, "Water." I shook my head, a practiced, gentle motion. "Not yet, honey. Soon, I promise. Just your name for me." He swallowed, a painful-looking effort. "James," he managed. "Private James Miller, 506. I was already cutting away the rough, wet wool of his jacket, my fingers working quickly, methodically. "Okay, James Miller, you just hang on. We're going to get you patched up." The wound was bad. A piece of shrapnel, it looked like, lodged high up on his left side, near his collarbone. It was bleeding steadily, a slow, sinister seep. I pressed a thick wad of gauze against it, applying pressure. He winced, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth. "Sorry," I murmured, my focus entirely on the task. My hands were stained red, my apron was a mess. I reached for a fresh bandage, my fingers brushing against something hard and rectangular in his torn jacket pocket. It was a small leather-bound book, about the size of my palm, a diary maybe, or a pocket Bible. It was slick with a mixture of mud and something darker. I didn't have time to think about it. I pulled it out, intending to set it aside with his other personal effects. But as I did, a small, faded photograph slipped from between its pages and fluttered down to land on his chest, right over his heart. My hands stilled. The world, for a single impossible second, went completely silent. The constant roar of generators, the moans of the wounded, the shouted orders from the doctors, it all just faded into a dull, distant hum. My breath caught in my throat, sharp and cold. I was looking down at a photograph of a young woman, smiling brightly, her hair styled in soft waves from a few years back. She was standing in front of a familiar old oak tree, the one that marked the boundary between the Sutton family farm and the Miller's place back home. The woman in the photograph was me. June 7th, 1944, I don't know how long I stood there frozen. It could have only been a heartbeat, but it felt like an eternity. Staring at my own face, smiling up from the chest of a dying boy I was sure I had never seen before in my life. Nurse Sutton. The voice, sharp and impatient, cut through the fog in my head. It was Major Henderson, his scrubs splattered, his face a mask of exhaustion. He was 2 litters down, his hands deep in an abdominal wound. "I need you present, nurse." The spell broke. I blinked, my fingers fumbling. I snatched the photograph, tucking it and the small book into my apron pocket in one fluid, almost guilty motion. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild, frantic bird. James Miller's eyes were closed again, his breathing shallow. "I'm here, Major," I called back, my voice miraculously steady. I turned back to James, my movements now fueled by a new, strange kind of energy. It wasn't just duty anymore. It was something personal, something fierce and protective. The next few hours were a blur of focused intensity. I helped get James prepped for surgery. I held his hand as the anesthetic took hold, his fingers cold and limp in mine. I watched as the doctors worked to extract the jagged piece of metal from his body. I didn't leave his side. I told myself it was because he was a critical case, because he needed a steady hand. But in the deepest, most secret part of me, I knew it was because of that photograph. I needed him to live. I needed to know how a boy named James Miller, a paratrooper from who knows where, came to be carrying a picture of me. He made it through the surgery. Lucky, the surgeon grunted as he stripped off his gloves. An inch to the left, and it would have severed the subclavian artery. He's young, strong. If infection doesn't set in, he might just make it. They moved him to the post-op ward, a vast, quieter tent filled with the soft sounds of suffering low moans, ragged breathing, the occasional cry for a mother that always made my heart clench. I made sure he was settled, checking his dressings, his pulse, his breathing. He was unconscious, his face peaceful now in a way it hadn't been before. And sleep. He looked even younger. My shift ended as the sun was beginning to think about rising. Not that you could see it through the perpetual overcast and smoke. The gray light was just the subtle lightening of the oppressive dark. I should have gone to the nurse's quarters, to the cot that promised a few precious hours of dreamless sleep. But I didn't. I found a quiet corner behind the supply tent, a small space sheltered by a stack of empty crates. The air was cold, and I pulled my wool blanket tighter around my shoulders. With trembling fingers, I pulled the small leather book and the photograph from my pocket, the photograph first. It was me, no doubt about it. It was taken the summer before I enlisted, 1942. I was wearing my favorite yellow dress, the one with the little white flowers. I remembered that day, a Sunday. I'd been to a picnic with, who? Friends from town? The memory was frustratingly vague. The war had a way of making the before times feel like a story someone else had told you. But how did he get it? The name James Miller meant nothing. Miller was a common name. There were a few Miller families in our county, but none with a boy James my age. At least, not that I could recall. I racked my brain, thinking of all the boys I'd gone to school with, the ones who'd left for the war before me. No James Miller. My attention turned to the book. It wasn't a diary. It was a small, pocket-sized notebook. The leather was soft and worn, darkened in places by water and what I feared was blood. My thumb traced the embossed initials on the cover, J.A.M. James A. Miller. I took a deep, steadying breath and opened it. The first few pages were filled with practical notes, map coordinates, radio frequencies, lists of equipment, the mundane life or death details of a paratrooper. But then the entries changed. They became more personal, scattered thoughts written into tight, slanted script. Some entries were dated, others were not. May 28th, 1944, another day of waiting. The English rain is a special kind of damp. It gets right into your bones. Played cards with the boys. Pete lost his watch to me in a bet. I'll give it back to him tomorrow. The waiting is the worst part. The not knowing. We all feel it. The air is thick with it. June 1st, 1944. They've locked us down. No more passes. This is it, the real thing. We all knew it was coming, but now that it's here, it feels surreal. Wrote a letter home to Mom and Dad. Tried to sound brave. I don't know if I fooled anyone. I keep thinking about home, about the farm, about that summer before everything changed. My heart gave a little lurch. That summer. My fingers trembled as I turned the page. June 3rd, 1944. They briefed us today. Maps, models, the whole show. It's big. Bigger than anything I could have imagined. I should be scared, and I am, but there's a strange calm too. A sense of purpose. I'm carrying her picture with me. A reminder of what we're fighting for. A reminder of a good day. A perfect day. I stopped reading. The words seemed to swim on the page. Her picture. He had to be talking about me. But a perfect day. What day? When? I flipped a few more pages, my eyes scanning the hurried script, and then I found it. An undated entry squeezed into the bottom of a page, as if it were an afterthought, a secret he couldn't keep to himself any longer. I never told her. I saw her by the old oak tree, the one that marked the property line. She was wearing a yellow dress. She was laughing. I was just the kid from the next farm over, too shy to say anything more than hello. She probably doesn't even remember me, but I remember her, Eleanor Sutton. I remember. The world tilted. The crates, the gray sky, the distant rumble of artillery, it all receded. I was 17 again, standing under the sprawling branches of that old oak tree. The sun was warm on my skin. I was wearing my yellow dress, and a boy, a lanky, quiet boy from the Miller farm, was walking by, driving their old tractor back from the far field. He tipped his hat, his face tanned and serious. I'd waved and smiled, called out a hello. He'd just nodded, a faint, shy smile touching his lips before he looked away. That was it. That was the entire fleeting interaction. A moment so small, so insignificant. I had buried it under a mountain of other memories, but he hadn't. He'd held on to it. He'd carried it with him across an ocean into the heart of the greatest war the world had ever known. He'd carried my picture. I closed the book, holding it tightly in my hands. The first rays of a weak gray dawn were filtering through the clouds, doing little to warm the chill in the air. I looked out towards the post-op tent, a silent, hulking shape in the half-light. James Miller wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a boy from home, a boy who had watched me from afar, who had thought of me on the eve of battle, a secret admirer whose secret was no mine to bear. And he was lying in a hospital bed, unaware that the girl from the photograph, the girl from the old oak tree, was now the nurse who held his life in her hands. What would I say to him when he woke up? Hello, I'm the nurse who saved your life, and by the way, I've been reading your most private thoughts. I tucked the book and the photograph back into my apron, the weight of them feeling immense. The chaos of the field hospital was starting to stir again around me. The war didn't stop for personal revelations. The wounded kept coming. The work was never done. But as I stood up, my body aching with a fatigue that went deeper than bone, I knew my war had just become infinitely more complicated. My secret was no longer just a forgotten smile and a yellow dress. It was a living, breathing boy named James, and I had no idea what to do with it. The days began to blur into one another, a relentless cycle of work, exhaustion, and stolen moments of worry over James. Station 76 was a world unto itself, a fragile pocket of order trying to hold back an ocean of chaos. The sounds were a constant symphony of suffering and repair, the deep-throated growl of trucks bringing in more wounded, the high whine of bone saws from the surgical tents, the soft, persistent murmur of men in pain, and the brusque, efficient voices of the doctors and nurses, my voice among them, a thread of calm in the storm. My world had shrunk to the dimensions of this muddy patch of France. The outside world, the one of headlines and radio broadcasts, felt like a fiction. This was the only reality: the smell of iodine and soil, the feel of a damp cloth on a fevered brow, the sight of blood that never quite washed out from under your fingernails. I was assigned to the post-op ward for the next stretch, a small mercy I didn't question. It meant I could watch over James. He drifted in and out of consciousness for 2 days. When he was awake, it was a haze of pain and morphine. His eyes would open, unfocused, and he'd mutter things that made no sense. Names of his buddies, fragments of orders. Once, he clearly said, "The cows need to get in before the storm." It sent a sharp, unexpected pang of homesickness through me. I just smoothed his hair back from his forehead and whispered, It's okay. The cows are in." He didn't know who I was, not really. In his lucid moments, he'd see the nurse's uniform, the cap, and his eyes would hold a kind of grateful, groggy recognition. "Thank you, ma'am," he'd rasp before sleep took him again. I learned the rhythm of his recovery. The fever that spiked on the second night, the way I spent hours bathing his face and arms with cool water until it broke, leaving him pale and exhausted but alive. I learned the way he clenched his jaw against the pain, a small muscle ticking in his cheek, refusing to cry out. He had a quiet dignity about him, even in his most vulnerable state. I also learned about him from the others. A couple of boys from his unit, wounded but ambulatory, hobbled over to his cot one afternoon. They were grimy, their uniforms in tatters, but their faces lit up when they saw him. "Look at old Jim," one of them, a lanky kid with a bandaged arm, said. "Lying around while the rest of us do all the work." James managed a weak smile. "You couldn't handle my work, Donnelly." They talked in low, easy tones, a camaraderie forged in fire. They called him Professor because he always had his nose in a book back in England. They joked about his terrible luck at cards. Listening to them, a picture of him began to form in my mind, separate from the shy boy from the farm. He was a reader, a thinker, a reliable soldier, his friends said, someone you wanted watching your back. It made the secret I carried feel even heavier. This person they knew, this Jim Miller, had a hidden depth that none of them suspected. And I was the sole keeper of it. After his friends left, he was quiet for a long time, just staring at the canvas ceiling. I went over to check his dressing. "They're good guys," he said quietly, his voice still rough. "They are," I agreed, my fingers gently probing the bandage. "No fresh bleeding. The wound was clean, thank God. It's good to have friends out here." He turned his head on the thin pillow to look at me. His eyes, that clear blue, were more focused than they'd been since he arrived. They studied my face for a moment, and my heart stuttered. Did he recognize me? From the photo? From the tree? But he just said, "You're from America, right?" "You sound like it." I forced a smile, my hands continuing their work. "I am, Ohio." A flicker of something recognition passed through his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "Ohio," he repeated. "That's good country." "It is," I said softly, my throat tight. "It's the best." He drifted off to sleep again soon after, and I stood there for a long moment, just watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. The connection felt so tangible, a wire stretched taut between this cot and a memory under an oak tree a world away. He was so close to the truth, and yet so far. The notebook burned a hole in my footlocker back in my quarters. I hadn't read any more of it. That one entry felt like enough of a violation, but the temptation was a constant, low hum in the back of my mind. Who is this boy, really? What other secrets was he keeping? Life in the hospital, however, has a way of forcing your attention outward. The flow of wounded was constant. We lost men we fought for hours to save. We celebrated small victories, a fever broken, a man taking his first steps again. I bonded with the other nurses, women from every corner of America, all of us united by a shared grim purpose. We'd share a cigarette during a rare break, our conversations a mix of dark humor and quiet despair. I had a boy today. My friend Clara from Georgia said one evening, her jaw heavy with fatigue. Couldn't have been more than 18, kept calling me Sissy. His sister's name, I suppose. He held my hand so tight, right up until the end. She took a long drag on her cigarette, her hand trembling slightly. I wrote to his mother tonight, told her he was brave and that he wasn't alone. We all had stories like that. They were the currency of our lives here. We collected them, carried them with us, a hidden weight that never got any lighter. Through it all, James continued to improve. His color was better. He was able to sit up to feed himself. He started to become more aware of his surroundings, of me. He thanked me for every small thing, for bringing his water, for adjusting his pillow. His manners were impeccable, a quiet politeness that felt out of place amidst the brutal reality of war. One afternoon, about a week after D-Day, I was changing his dressing. The wound was healing well, an angry red line of stitches, but it was clean. He was watching my hands, my concentrated focus. "You have very gentle hands, Nurse Sutton," he said quietly. The comment, so simple and sincere, caught me off guard. My eyes flicked up to meet his. There was no flirtation in his gaze, just a straightforward gratitude. But in that direct look, I saw the boy from the tractor again. The shy, serious eyes were the same. "It's the least I can do," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I finished taping the new bandage in place. "You're healing very well, Private Miller." "You're a lucky man, James," he said. "Please, call me James, I think after all this." He gestured vaguely at his bandaged chest. "We can be on a first-name basis." A small, genuine smile touched my lips. "Okay, James, I'm Eleanor." "Eleanor," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. He nodded slowly. "It's a good name. A strong name." He had no idea that he had just spoken my name for the first time, while I had been carrying his in my mind for over a week. The imbalance of it all felt dizzying. Here we were, having a perfectly normal, even pleasant, conversation, and the whole time, I was standing on a foundation of his private thoughts, a foundation he didn't know I possessed. Later that day, I was tasked with helping to inventory a new shipment of medical supplies. It was mindless physical work, and I was grateful for it. It required no emotional energy, just counting and stacking. We worked in a large supply tent, the air thick with the smell of new canvas and carbolic acid. I was reaching for a box of syringes on a high shelf when my foot caught on a loose crepe. I stumbled, and a sharp, searing pain shot through my ankle. I let out a small, involuntary cry and slumped against the shelves, gripping my leg. Instantly, one of the orderlies was at my side. "Nurse Sutton, you okay?" "My ankle," I gasped, the pain bringing tears to my eyes. "I think I twisted it." He helped me hop to an upturned crate, and I sat down, gritting my teeth. The medic on duty was called, a harried-looking corporal who prodded my ankle with practiced fingers. "Yeah, that's a good sprain," he announced. "No walking on it for a day or two." "You're off your feet, nurse. I'll get you some crutches." Frustration warred with the throbbing pain. Being incapacitated was a luxury none of us could afford. I was helped back to the nurses' quarters, a long, miserable hop and a skip, and deposited on my cot with a pair of rough wooden crutches. My ankle was already swelling, a hot, tight ache. The next morning, I reported to the wardmaster, a stern but fair man named Sergeant O'Malley. "Sutton, you're about as useful as a screen door on a submarine right now," he grumbled, looking at my crutches with disdain. "But we can't have you idle. The mail has backed up something terrible. You can sit at a desk and sort it. Heaven knows those boys need their letters from home." And so I found myself in a small, partitioned off area of the admin tent, surrounded by sacks and sacks of mail. Letters, packages, all covered in a fine layer of French dust. It was a mountain of hope and connection. My ankle propped up on another crate, I began the tedious but strangely soothing task of sorting through it all, organizing it by unit, by name. The repetitive motion was a balm. It was a piece of normalcy, a thread connecting this broken place to the whole sane world we'd left behind. I saw names I recognized from the wards. I saw shaky handwriting from elderly parents and the looping, elegant script of sweethearts. Each envelope was a story, a life waiting to be resumed. I worked for hours, the pile of sorted mail growing steadily. My hand reached into a sack and pulled out a thick bundle of letters, tied together with string. As I lifted them, a single cream-colored envelope slipped from the middle of the bundle and fluttered to the floor. I bent down, wincing at the pull on my ankle, and picked it up. It was addressed in a neat, feminine hand. "Private James A. Miller, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne, somewhere in France." My breath hitched. It was for him. I stared at the return address in the upper left corner. It was from a Mrs. Abigail Miller in a small town in Pennsylvania, his mother. But it wasn't the return address that held my gaze. It was the postmark. The date, stamped neatly in black ink, was clear as day. May 29th, 1944. My mind raced, scrambling. James had been writing in his notebook on June 1st, locked down in England. His mother had mailed this letter on May 29th. With the chaos of the invasion, the sheer logistical nightmare of getting mail to a fighting unit that had just dropped behind enemy lines, there was no way this letter had reached him before he jumped. This was his first mail, the first word from home since he'd landed in France, since he'd been wounded. And I was holding it. The ethical thing, the professional thing, was to simply put it in the sorted pile for his unit. It would find its way to him eventually, but I couldn't let it go. This wasn't like the notebook, a private journal I had stumbled upon. This was a letter from his mother. It was a voice from his world, from the world we shared. It was a thread that connected directly to the mystery of him, to the boy who remembered a girl in a yellow dress. The temptation was overwhelming. I looked around. The admin tent was quiet, the few clerks at their desks, heads down, focused on their own work. The crates of supplies formed a wall around my little sorting station. I was utterly alone with this decision. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was wrong. I knew it was wrong. It was a violation of his trust, of the Army's regulations, of simple human decency. But the secret I carried was a lonely, heavy burden. I was desperate for context, for a clue, for anything that would help me understand the chasm between the shy farm boy and the paratrooper called Professor and the man who carried my picture into battle. My fingers, almost of their own volition, trembled as I carefully slid my thumb under the flap of the envelope. The glue gave way with a soft tearing sound that seemed to echo in the quiet tent. I held my breath, pulled out the folded sheets of paper, and began to read. The words were a river, pulling me into the deep, quiet current of James Miller's other life, a life I was never meant to see. My hands were trembling so badly the paper rustled like dry leaves. The guilt was a physical weight, a cold stone in my stomach. I was violating a sacred trust, the unspoken rule that a soldier's mail was his own private sanctuary. But the pull was too strong. The secret of that photograph had created a vacuum in my understanding, and this letter, this voice from his world, felt like the only thing that could fill it. I unfolded the pages, the creases sharp against my fingers. The handwriting was elegant and practiced, a looping cursive that spoke of a woman who took her time, who chose her words with care. My dearest James, it feels like a lifetime since I last wrote, though I know it's only been a week. The weather here has turned warm, finally. Your father says the early corn is coming in strong, and the old oak tree at the property line is finally full of leaves. It makes me think of you, always playing in its shade when you were a boy. It's standing there still, strong and steady, just like I know you are. I had to stop for a moment, my breath catching. The oak tree. It was there, in his mother's letter, a ghost from both our pasts standing sentinel in her words. I could see it so clearly, its massive, gnarled branches, the dappled light filtering through the leaves. I forced myself to read on. We got your last letter, the one from the 20th. Thank you for writing, my love. It's the only thing that keeps my heart from worrying itself into a frenzy. You sounded in good spirits. I'm glad you have Pete and the others with you. It comforts me to know you're not alone. Your sister Sarah sends all her love. She's been helping me with the canning, though she complains about it endlessly. She started seeing a nice young man from the next town over, a mechanic. He seems kind and he makes her laugh, which is all a mother can ask for. We don't talk about it much when your father is around. You know how he is, but we both miss you terribly. The house is too quiet without your radio playing or your books stacked on the stairs. I'm sending a package along with this letter. Just some of your favorite cookies, the oatmeal raisin ones, and a new pair of socks I knitted. I know it's not much, but I hope it brings you a little piece of home. I pray it finds you safe and well. Now, I have some news that I've been putting off telling you, not knowing if it would be a burden or a comfort. I ran into Mr. Sutton at the feed store last week. He was asking after you. He said his daughter, Eleanor, is over there too. A nurse somewhere in England, he thought. Can you imagine? That sweet girl from next door, a nurse. I always thought she was such a lovely young woman. I remember you used to have such a crush on her when you were both teenagers. You'd get so flustered whenever she'd wave to you from the yard. The world seemed to tilt. The sounds of the admin tent, the scratching of pens, the shuffling of papers faded into a dull, distant hum. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. She knew, his mother knew. She was speaking about me, about that fleeting, forgotten moment, as if it were a known fact of their family history. You used to have such a crush on her. He gave me her address, the army one for her unit, just in case your paths ever crossed. He said it would be a comfort to him to know that someone from home was nearby. I've enclosed it on a separate slip of paper. I don't know if it's appropriate to send it, or if you'd even want it, but a father's worry. Well, you understand. Perhaps you could look her up if you get a chance. It might be nice to see a familiar face. Oh, James, my dear boy, I wish I had more cheerful news to share. Everything here is just waiting. We are all waiting for you to come home. Be safe, be brave. Know that we love you more than words can say. All my love, Mom. P.S. Your father says to keep your head down and listen to your sergeant. He's proud of you, son. We both are. The letter ended there. I sat utterly still, the pages resting in my lap. The separate, smaller slip of paper fluttered down. I picked it up. It was my name, my unit, my army postal address, written in the same neat hand. My father, worried about his daughter off at war, had reached out to the family next door. He had given them a thread, a hope of connection, and his mother had sent that thread across the ocean right into her son's hands. Except it hadn't reached his hands. It had reached mine. So many pieces clicked into place, the mechanism of fate turning with an almost audible sound. He hadn't stolen my picture. He hadn't been some secret, obsessive admirer. His mother had sent him my address, a gesture from one worried parent to another. And he, James, had written in his notebook that he'd never told me. He'd been too shy. He'd carried the picture as a reminder of home, of a simpler time, of a girl he once knew. A good day. A perfect day. The weight in my chest didn't disappear, but it transformed. The guilt was still there, a sharp, prickling thing for having read his private mail. But layered over it was a profound, aching understanding. This wasn't a dramatic secret. It was a human one. It was about homesickness and nostalgia and the small, fragile things we cling to in the dark. I carefully, reverently folded the letter and the slip of paper and slid them back into the envelope. I resealed it as best I could, hoping the slight tampering wouldn't be noticed. Then I placed it not in the general sorted pile, but squarely in the center of my workspace. It was his. I had to give it to him. The secret was now a shared burden, and I had to find a way to carry my half without letting him know the truth. The next few days were a lesson in quiet torture. My ankle healed enough for me to ditch the crutches and return to light duty in the wards. A slight limp, my only reminder. Every time I approached James's cot, the envelope felt like it was burning a hole in my apron pocket. I'd practiced a dozen casual ways to give it to him. Oh, look, some mail came for you. I was sorting and saw your name. Your mother must be thinking of you. They all sounded hollow and false in my head. He was getting stronger by the day. He was sitting up for longer periods, reading a dog-eared paperback novel one of the orderlies had found for him. He was engaging more with the other men in the ward, his quiet voice a calm presence amidst the groans and chatter. And he always had a smile for me, a genuine, warm light in those blue eyes that made my practice speeches die in my throat. Finally, on a morning when the rain was drumming a steady, soothing rhythm on the canvas roof, I found my moment. He was alone, his book resting in his lap, staring out at the gray, wet world beyond the tent flap. Good book? I asked, my voice sounding a little too bright. He turned and smiled. It's all right. Better than staring at the walls. He gestured with his chin to the rain. Reminds me of home. Spring rains. It does, I agreed, my heart starting to thump. This was it. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. I was helping sort the mountain mail that came in. This was in the pile for your unit. I thought I'd bring it to you myself. I held it out. He looked at it, and his expression shifted. The casual ease vanished, replaced by a kind of hungry wonder. It was the look of a man in a desert being offered a cool, clear glass of water. Mail, he breathed, taking the envelope from me as if it were made of spun glass. His fingers traced his name, his mother's handwriting. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you so much. You're welcome, I said softly, and I started to turn away to give him his privacy. No, wait, he said, his voice urgent. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and earnest. Would you mind staying, just for a minute? It's silly, but getting mail out here, it feels like you need to have someone to share it with, just for a second to prove it's real. My throat tightened. How could I refuse? I nodded and pulled up the small wooden stool beside his cot. Of course. His hands were not quite steady as he opened the envelope. He didn't seem to notice the slightly torn flap. He unfolded the pages, and a soft, almost blissful sigh escaped him as he began to read. I watched his face, the play of emotions across his features. A smile touched his lips at the mention of his sister. A shadow of homesickness at the news of the farm. His eyes lingered on a particular paragraph, and I knew, with a jolt, that he was reading about me. His cheeks flushed just a little, a faint pink rising under his tan. He didn't look at me, but quickly moved on to the rest of the letter. When he finished, he folded the pages carefully and held them against his chest for a long moment, his eyes closed. He was somewhere else, far away from the smells of antiseptic and the sounds of suffering. He was in his mother's kitchen, with the smell of oatmeal raisin cookies and the sound of his sister's laughter. Finally, he opened his eyes and looked at me, They were shimmering with unshed tears. She's well. They're all well. He let out a long, slow breath. It's like, it's like getting a shot of straight hope. I know the feeling, I said, and I truly did. It's the best medicine we can't bottle. He nodded, then seemed to remember the second part of the letter. He picked up the small slip of paper that had fallen onto his blanket. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, not looking at it, but not putting it away either. My mother, he began, his voice a little hesitant. She mentioned something in the letter about you. The air between us grew still. This was the moment I had both dreaded and, in a secret part of myself, longed for. I kept my expression neutral, curious. Oh? He looked down at the slip of paper, then back at me. She says she ran into your father, Mr. Sutton. He told her you were over here, a nurse. She sent your address. He held out the slip of paper to me, as if returning something that was rightfully mine. She thought maybe I could look you up. See a familiar face? I took the paper, my fingers brushing against his. A spark, small and electric, passed between us. I looked down at my own name, my own address, written in his mother's hand. I had to play this just right. My dad, I said, shaking my head with a fond smile. He's a worrier. Always has been. I suppose it's a small world, even in a war this big. I looked up and met his gaze. So, you're from right next door? The Miller farm? He looked relieved, as if he'd been expecting a different reaction. Yes, ma'am, I am. Well, not right next door, but the next farm over. You probably don't remember me. This was the lie I had to tell, the lie that would protect his secret and my own transgression. Of course I remember you, I said, and that much was true. It's James, right? You used to drive that old red tractor past our property line. His face lit up, a real, unguarded smile that reached his eyes and made him look like the boy he truly was. You remember that? I do, I said softly. I remember waving to you. You always seemed very serious for a boy. He chuckled, a low, warm sound. I was probably trying to look like I knew what I was doing. I was always a little in awe of you, Eleanor Sutton. You were a year ahead of me in school, and you always seemed so sure of yourself. The honesty in his words was disarming. He was laying his teenage heart bare without the filter of his journal, and it was infinitely more powerful. The shy boy from the farm and the paratrooper were merging into one person, and that person was sitting in front of me, brave enough to admit a childhood crush to the woman she had become. I wasn't sure of myself at all, I confessed, feeling a need to match his honesty with a piece of my own. I was just good at pretending. We looked at each other for a long moment, and the understanding that passed between us was as real and as solid as the ground beneath us. We were two people from the same small corner of the world, thrown together in this terrible place, and the connection felt like a lifeline. Well, he said, finally breaking the silence. I'm glad our paths crossed, Eleanor Sutton. Even under these circumstances. Me too, James Miller, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Me too. From that day on, something shifted between us. The formality of nurse and patient began to gently erode, replaced by the easy familiarity of two people who share a home. We didn't talk about the war much, or the fighting. We talked about Ohio. We talked about the taste of fresh-picked apples in the fall, the way the heat rose in shimmering waves from the asphalt in the summer, the particular sound of the crickets on a late August evening. He told me about his father's stubbornness, about his sister Sarah's dramatic flair, about his dog, a collie named Rex, who would herd the chickens into a state of frantic confusion. I told him about my mother's garden, her prize-winning roses, and how my father could never sit still, always fixing, building, or tinkering with something. We built a small, quiet world of memory inside the large, noisy world of the hospital. It was a sanctuary. When I made my rounds, I would linger by his cot a little longer. Sometimes, if he was feeling strong, I would help him take a slow, shuffling walk down the aisle between the cots, his arm linked through mine for support. He was steady, his presence a calm anchor in the relentless storm of my days. I learned that his quietness wasn't shyness, not really. It was a kind of deep observation. He noticed things. He noticed when a new nurse was struggling and needed a hand. He noticed when the man in the cot next to him was having a particularly bad day and would strike up a quiet conversation to distract him. He had a quiet courage that wasn't about jumping out of airplanes, but about enduring, about maintaining his decency in the face of utter indecency. One evening, I found him not with his novel, but with his small leather-bound notebook. He was writing, his brow furrowed in concentration. My heart did a little flip-flop of panic. Was he writing about me? About our conversation? He looked up and saw me watching him. He didn't snap the book shut or try to hide it. He just smiled, a little sheepishly. My journal, he explained. I've been keeping it since training. Helps to sort my thoughts out. That's a good idea, I said, my voice thankfully even. I have one too. It's how I stay sane. Exactly, he said, nodding in agreement. He looked down at the page, then back at me. It's mostly just nonsense. Things I don't want to forget. I believed him. But I also knew that within that nonsense was a record of a perfect day and a girl in a yellow dress. And that knowledge was now part of me, a secret I would carry to keep his dignity intact. As the days turned into a week, and then two, the hospital began to change. The frantic, emergency-level chaos of the first days after the invasion gradually settled into a more managed, relentless flow. The wounded were still coming, but now there were also men being discharged, deemed stable enough to be sent back to England for further recovery, or in some cases back to their units. The war was moving inland, and we were a fixed point, processing the human cost. I tried not to think about James leaving. The thought was a cold knot in my stomach. His recovery was progressing well. The doctors were already talking about moving him to a convalescent hospital across the channel. Our little sanctuary had walls of canvas, and I knew they were temporary. One afternoon, we were on one of our slow walks, his arm in mine, moving past the rows of cots towards the tent flap for a breath of air that didn't smell of sickness. They're talking about shipping me out soon, he said quietly, as if he'd been reading my thoughts. I heard, I said, my throat tight. That's good news, James. It means you're healing. I suppose it is, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. We stepped outside into the pale sunlight. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant pine. We stood there for a moment, just breathing it in. Eleanor, he said, his voice low and serious. When I first got here, in those first few days I was in and out of it, I remember bits and pieces. I remember being scared. I remember the pain, but I also remember a presence. A calm voice, gentle hands. He turned to look at me, his blue eyes clear and direct. That was you, wasn't it? You were there the whole time. I nodded, unable to speak. You saved my life, he said, the words simple and heavy with meaning. The doctors saved your life, I corrected him softly. They did their part, he conceded. But you kept me tethered to it? I know you did. He paused, searching for the right words. I woke up once. I think it was the second night. I had a fever. I was burning up and freezing cold at the same time. And you were there with a cool cloth bathing my face. You were singing something. I don't remember what it was, just a tune. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. I have forgotten that. In the haze of that long, fearful night, I had sung an old hymn my mother used to sing to me when I was sick. I didn't even realize I was doing it. I didn't think you were aware of anything, I whispered. I wasn't, not really, he said, but my soul was. I heard you. He reached out and, with a tenderness that made my heart ache, took my hand. His grip was strong, his skin warm. Thank you, Eleanor, for everything. I looked down at our joined hands, then back up at his face. The sounds of the hospital, the war, the world, all faded away. There was just his hand in mine and the gratitude in his eyes, and a feeling so vast and complicated I had no name for it. You don't have to thank me, James, I said. It's why I'm here. He held my hand for a moment longer, then gently let it go. The spot where his skin had touched mine felt warm, imprinted. We stood in silence for a while longer, watching the clouds drift across the French sky. Two people from Ohio bound together by a war, a memory and a secret that would forever remain unspoken, a quiet understanding woven into the fabric of our strange and unexpected bond. The orders came down 2 days later. A transport was leaving for England at the end of the week, and James Miller was on the list. The knowledge hung over our last days together like a soft, gray cloud. We didn't talk about it directly, but it was there in every conversation and every glance. He spent his last afternoon helping one of the orderlies write a letter home to his sweetheart. The orderly, a young man from Brooklyn with a 4th-grade education, was full of stories but short on words. James sat with him, patient as a saint, and helped him shape his feelings into sentences on a page. I watched from across the tent, my heart swelling with a fierce, proud affection. This was who he was. This was the boy from the farm and the paratrooper, all in one. On his final evening, I brought him a small parting gift. It wasn't much. A new small notebook and a couple of pencils I'd managed to procure from the supply sergeant. For your thoughts, I said, handing it to him. He took it, his fingers brushing against mine. He looked down at the simple, unmarked notebook, and when he looked up, his eyes were bright. Thank you, Eleanor. I'll treasure it. You'll write? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. It was against regulations, really, for a nurse and a patient, but we were so far beyond those rules now. I will, he promised without hesitation, as often as I can, and you. You'll write back? I will, I said. I'll tell you all the news from Station 76, though I warn you, it's mostly about the weather and the state of the coffee. He smiled. That's all I'll need. The morning of the transport dawned clear and cold. I helped him get his things together. He had very little, his washed and mended uniform, his personal effects, and the 2 notebooks, the old one with its secrets and the new one with its promise. I had returned his old one to him the week before, telling him I'd found it with his belongings when they were cleaned and stored. He'd taken it with a nod of thanks, none the wiser. We walked together to the loading area where a line of trucks stood, their engines rumbling. The air was filled with the good-natured shouts of men who were getting out, who were on their way to a proper bed and clean sheets, and a world that wasn't defined by the front lines. Well, he said, turning to me. He shifted his small bag from one hand to the other. I guess this is it. I guess it is, I replied. The words I wanted to say, be safe, take care of yourself, don't be a hero, clogged my throat. They were the same words every woman had said to every man leaving for this war since the beginning of time. Eleanor, he said, his voice low. I meant what I said. About writing. I know, I said. I'll be waiting for your letter. He looked at me, really looked at me, his gaze taking in my face as if memorizing it. Then he did something that surprised us both. He leaned forward and gently kissed my cheek. His lips were warm against my skin, a brief, soft pressure that sent a shock of warmth through my whole body. For luck, he whispered, his breath warm near my ear. Before I could respond, he was turning away, climbing up into the back of the truck with the help of an orderly. He found a spot on the wooden bench and looked back at me, raising a hand in a slow, final wave. I raised my own hand, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. The truck engine roared, and then it was pulling away, jolting over the ruts in the road, kicking up a cloud of dust that slowly settled back to earth. He was gone. The emptiness that settled over me was profound. The ward felt different without his quiet presence. The walks I took on my breaks were lonelier. The war felt louder, harsher, without the sanctuary of our shared memories to retreat into. That night, in the quiet of the nurses' quarters, I took out my own diary. I opened it to a fresh page and picked up my pen. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush. I wrote about the boy from the next farm over. I wrote about the paratrooper with the clear blue eyes. I wrote about the photograph and the letter, and the secret I would carry for both of us. I wrote about the feeling of his hand in mine, and the brush of his lips on my cheek. I poured it all onto the page, the whole tangled, beautiful, heartbreaking story. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if his transport would make it safely across the channel. I didn't know if the war would bring him back to the front lines, or if it would bring me to some other field hospital in another broken country. The not knowing was a vast and frightening ocean, but as I closed my diary and blew out the small lamp next to my cot, I realized that for the first time in a long time, the feeling that lingered wasn't fear or exhaustion or despair. It was a fragile but stubborn sense of hope. It was the memory of a perfect day under an oak tree, a memory I hadn't even known I owned, now given back to me by a boy named James. It was the promise of a letter, a thread of connection that would stretch across the water, tying our two stories together. The war had taken so much, but it had given me this one unexpected thing. And as I lay in the dark, listening to the distant, familiar rumble of the guns, I held on to that gift, and I waited for the dawn,